I can confirm we are now live.
Thank you, Joey. Welcome everyone to tonight's Environment and Communities Overview and Scrutiny Panels review into integrated enforcement. We will start with item 1 on the agenda, which is apologies for absence.
I've received apologies from Councillor Angel, Councillor Ingham, Councillor Templeton and Andrew Hunter.
Thank you, Joey. Does anybody else bring any other apologies, please? Okay, moving on to item 2, which is declarations of interest. There's a nice long paragraph on there, and I'm sure we're all familiar with it. So would any member like to declare any interest, please? There are no declarations of interest. So we will move on to item 3, which is a summary of the review and recommendations. So I will kick off with the summary of the review, and hopefully members will also join in with their thoughts about how the review has gone. The review was to look at whether we had good integrated enforcement within the borough and how we work with our partners. And I think it was quite clear from the review that we do have a very good enforcement team working at Bracknell Forest Council, and they most certainly integrate and work with other partners, including Thames Valley Police and the Royal Berks Fire and Rescue Service. We also had a presentation from an officer from the Royal Borough of Greenwich. Basically, they were bringing into their council integrated enforcement, and basically it sounded like our public protection partnership. So it was very pleasing to know that we're already one step ahead. Some things that did come out of the review was we think we need to look at the strategy and policy of our enforcement, and you'll all be pleased to know that will actually be our next review. So we look forward to looking into that whilst we've got the subject in mind. Does any other members have anything they would like to add, please? I see no hands up. So, oh, John Harrison, please.
Thanks, John. Yeah, I wanted to make sure that any members of the committee that took part in review could have their say first before I kind of responded on this. Because I think I'd like to thank you for doing the review. It's been interesting to play my small part in it, and also to hear some of the arguments that have come out of it. And I think a lot of the thinking is very much along the lines of what we're thinking with the Public Protection Partnership. These arguments about better integration, better working together, I think that really also emphasises that actually where teams are together in larger teams, they've got more resilience and strength. And that's one of the positive things about the Public Protection Partnership, where we're in partnership with West Berkshire, because we get to share a bunch of very talented officers, and we've got a bigger team for it. Yeah. So all in all, thank you for that. I think I need to discuss the findings in details with officers in terms of how do we implement that. Some of it, I think, is what we're doing already. We're certainly working better in partnership with Thames Valley. Things are picking up. Thames Valley Police, rather, things are picking up, because I think there was a bit of a hiatus with COVID, which took everybody's resources to focus on sort of COVID prevention measures and enforcement of certain regulations, and those things took a lot of officer time. But we are in a good position for recovering the service back to where we should be. And you know, we've got a little bit, I heard last night, a little bit of an underspend that can go towards actually picking up some of the backlog that we've got in some of the food enforcement. So I think that's a good position to be in, and these are constructive suggestions going forward. I look forward to working with you to flesh it all out in terms of how we're actually going to do it.
Yeah, thanks, John. Just going on from that, I think the situation regarding COVID, it demonstrated the strength of our public protection team, that they were able to deal with everything that was thrown at them COVID related, as well as continuing with their normal 9 to 5 job. So I'd like to thank our officers for all their hard work and dedication. And I see Sean's on the line tonight, so hopefully we'll be able to pass that on to all his team. They most certainly worked extremely hard. And last night, we was at a public protection meeting, and the team aren't that far behind with their inspections. So it is great credit to the team that they're in such a strong position going forwards. Tricia, please.
Hi, thank you. You said when opening that we discovered by talking to the officer from Woolwich, was it? That Greenwich, I beg your pardon, that we were well up on these things, and you said ahead of them in some respects. I'm not sure how that is, but and what a good team we've got. So it begs the question, it's not explained anywhere, why we need to do this extra CSAS stuff, I beg your pardon. What is it that we don't do that we should do? Because why is it that we need to do it, and what the costs are and so on. And I think we do need, when making the recommendations, to explain the reasons for it and the costs involved and why it's worth the funds that we're going to spend on it.
I'm sure when we come to the recommendations, Tricia, that when we come to the CSAS one, I'm sure we've got Sean online and we've got another expert online as well. And they can hopefully, I'm sorry that you don't know what CSAS is going to provide to us. It's something we've been trying to introduce to this council for at least 3 years, and unfortunately COVID did kick it to the sidelines for temporarily. Unfortunately, Thames Valley Police, for example, are under a lot of pressure with their resources, and when we have taxi inspections and we need to stop taxis, we need Thames Valley Police to be present. If an officer is accredited with CSAS for that particular thing, we can actually have an officer stopping those taxis. So we don't need to rely on Thames Valley Police to actually be present. So it actually assists our enforcement to make sure that the public are a lot safer.
So it's instead of police?
It's not instead of, it's working alongside the police and actually having a better enforcement, that we can actually call upon our officers rather than just solely relying on Thames Valley Police all the time. But I believe there are 40 different powers that we can actually apply for. So, we're not going to be applying for all 40, but we will certainly be looking at some of them, which will assist, our enforcement team to actually work far more efficiently, to actually make sure that the public are safe. Anybody else, please, before we go on to the recommendations? Yeah, Damien has posted in the chat link for the CSAS. So thank you for that, Damien. So hopefully everybody will look at that. Tina, please.
Hang on. Thank you, Chairman. Just to say, Trish, if you'd like to know more, and from, in inverted commas, the horse's mouth, our Detective Chief Inspector Helen Kenny will be attending Crowthorne's NAG this Thursday, 7 o'clock, and she will be explaining to the public what CSAS means. So if you'd like to come to that as another option for you to understand the area that we're talking about, you'd be very, very welcome. 7 o'clock this Thursday, which means, of course, you're going to have to miss planning. I know that's going to really upset you. Anyway, so we can meet there and talk to Helen and have a personal view on it, if you like.
Thank you, Tina. Ian, please.
Thank you, Chair. Tricia, you do raise some very important issues. And I think overall we're seeking to add value to our enforcement responsibilities. But as John mentioned, in terms of taxis, as an example, at the moment we're organised via an ad hoc relationship with Thames Valley Police. If they happen to be free and they can stop the taxis so we can carry out the compliance checks, so be it. But if we were to arrange something, a proactive or a reactive investigation around that type of compliance, the police can get sucked away at any time. One good example, in TfL, we're paying the Metropolitan Police nearly £50,000 a year just for 2 officers to stop taxis. They were trained for a very minimal amount and saved about £50,000. So it is a tremendous return on investment. And as was said by Tina, I'd really encourage you to speak to the Chief Inspector at Bracknell to give some more sort of real life examples of how this has aided the police and local enforcement in particular, not only in Thames Valley, but in many police forces throughout England and Wales. Thanks, John.
Thank you for those words, Ian. Tricia, again, please.
Thank you for the possibility to speak again. Yes, the point I was making is that those things that luckily Ian has mentioned are not in the recommendations. They need to be there because effectively there is no reason, if we've got a good team, why we need to do this, except that we can't get hold of the police whenever we want them, I suppose. But I mean, I listened to everything before. I know what you're trying to do. But the point is that it's not explicit in the recommendations, and it should be. People need to know why you're spending this money, because you've got a perfectly good police force, or have we? You know, see where I'm coming from.
Tricia, I see where you're coming from, but unfortunately, I think you're actually missing the point. The point is that we could actually plan to have an evening of taxi enforcement, and we have a lot of officers on duty and everything else, and at the last minute, the police unfortunately have to attend to something else, and they withdraw their manpower. Therefore, we've got a lot
I'm
of
sorry,
wasted...
John. I'm sorry, John, but that is...
No, please don't talk. I let you talk.
That is
Tricia.
exactly my point. I'm sorry, Chair, but it is exactly my point, and you're missing the point.
No. The recommendation regarding CSAS is a very good one, and I think it will be explained extremely well, and it will be very good value for money for our residents. Sean, would you like to come in before John Harrison, please?
Yeah, just to say, Chair, that the issue of well, let me just go back one step, if I may. So obviously the council has a whole range of powers and duties and responsibilities, what is being looked at in relation to CSAS are things that are complementary, I suppose, to existing powers or existing duties. So, I mean, one of them is stopping vehicle, but there are actually other ones which are in there. For example, and I'll give you an example. One of them is the being able to issue a fixed penalty for the sale of alcohol to a person under the age of 18. Now, at the moment, basically, we don't have that option. We go out and we do, for example, test purchasing of alcohol, and then we're left with a range of options, but none of those options include the issue to issue a fixed penalty. So it could be no further action, it could be a caution, it could be a license review, it could be a prosecution. But that, for example, is a power, basically this is available under this scheme. And I guess what we'll need to do at some point is, once we've got, if the recommendations are adopted and then we go down this route, is to decide which of those powers it is that we need to look at. So just really to say that the scheme is quite wide in terms of its application. There are things that are actually under the terms of the scheme that we've already got powers to deal with. For example, things like some of the environmental offences and things like that. So they would bring nothing to us. But there are other areas, basically, where the additional powers would assist in relation to our duties that we've already got.
Yeah, I fully agree with you, Sean, that if the recommendations are adopted, that we then have a meeting to discuss what parts of the CSAS we would like to actually undertake to assist and make our enforcement a lot smoother for our residents. John Harrison, please.
Thanks, John. Yeah, I actually think Tricia asked a very good question, which was, what are the police not doing, and that we need to step in and have these powers. It is, as was said, a somewhat different situation, but it's sometimes we do have situations where we have low-level antisocial behaviour, and as we saw during the COVID period, that it was quite useful that we had COVID wardens to be able to go and install some sort of order and stop people doing things they shouldn't have been doing that wouldn't have really merited calling out the police. And sometimes you just need a grown-up in the room, I think, to go and say to people, oh, stop it, that's not right, and to have some statutory powers and training to deal with that. So I think it would be good for us to have access to some officers with those powers to be able to go and intervene where necessary, if that's deemed a thing we think is desirable in our local community.
Yeah, thanks, John. Damien, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, just to add to what Sean has already eloquently said, the CSAS powers are wide-ranging, and it wouldn't just be the officers within the Public Protection Partnership that potentially could use CSAS powers. So we could, if the recommendations were accepted, Chair, for example, community safety might well use some of those powers within their team. So it's quite a wide range of areas that could have access to that, subject to obviously training and completing a necessary application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Damien. Sean, please.
Actually, that's a very important point that David's just made, actually, because there are a range of powers, and obviously there's a range of enforcement bodies within the organisation. So the nature of the scheme is that obviously we need to get the council admitted into the scheme, and then obviously there are a number of powers that we can draw down, and then there may be different officers in the organisation or working with the organisation that can exercise those powers. What I actually wanted to say, Chair, was just really in relation to the working relationship with the police. So just picking up on what Councillor Harrison has said, I just really want to confirm that the excellent working relationship that we have with the police, and since we've started to sort of get into the sort of post-COVID enforcement era, we have reopened a lot of the sort of checks and things like that we've been doing with the police, and we've seen some of that in the borough with the days of action that we've had around things like waste transit and things like overloaded vehicles and other joint working with the police that we've already done. I mean, police resources limited though, and actually getting those things organised is quite difficult. And I guess this was where the additional power comes back in to be able to do just some of this stuff in relation to stopping vehicles ourselves. But I really just wanted to make it very clear that we get tremendous support from the police, basically when they're able, when we seek it as a service and as an authority.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. Ian Kirk, please.
Thanks, Chair. Just picking up on the training as well. In addition to the enforcement powers, a big part of the training is making staff a lot safer in terms of their personal safety. So as John said, when somebody stands up to maybe give words of wisdom to somebody, they're better trained in order to keep themselves safe. I know that my postgraduate work has shown that to a typical organisation, an assault at work can be anything north of 10 grand to any organisation. So it's a great way of keeping our officers safe as well. So there's a big element of people skills and keeping safe in the actual training delivery, which is really, in terms of the national reach, it is really, peanuts compared with what we can save overall. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Michael Brassard, please.
Thank you, John. In fact, just ready to reinforce what Sean had said, it must have been about 3 weeks ago that there was the activity, the significant activity at Par Acres, when the police really descended in force. And there were, I saw a number of vans that were overloaded. There were obviously elements sticking out of the rear. What I have to say, what I'd like to say, John, is how proactive the police were. When they have the resources available, they will come en masse. It is not just one or two officers. There were several police vehicles, there were vans, and the level of support that we got and of the level of, I think, engagement with those people who defended in terms of overloading and such like, and also vehicles that were uninsured or untaxed. So I have to commend the police for their support that they gave us on that day. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Michael. I'm not disputing that we have a great relationship with Thames Valley Police. It is just that if ever Thames Valley Police had to pull out at the last moment, we would actually still be able to continue with the planned work that particular day. Okay, we will move on to the recommendations then. The first recommendation is to introduce the Community Safety Accreditation Scheme, or CSAS as we've been calling it, as a new standard. And that's to provide appropriate officers with training, ensuring they become accredited, encourage other appropriate officers to participate in becoming accredited where practical and where resources is available. So any comments on that recommendation, please? Tricia.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah. Who is going to oversee these guys? Are we going to need someone who has all of the accreditation so they can check what activity the other officers are taking on or carrying out?
Sorry, what was the question? Sorry, I missed the...
Because we will have officers with various different accreditations to do various tasks, I imagine, yeah? Are we going to have to employ or train up a more senior officer with all those accreditations so they can check what the less senior people are doing?
Right, I will ask Sean Murphy to come in there, but as far as I believe we would actually go to a company that actually provides the CSAS training rather than having an officer doing the training, because we would need to actually have a company that is actually accredited with the relevant police force to actually carry out such training. But Sean, over to you, please.
Yeah, I will do. So Councillor Brown, so effectively the scheme itself requires the authority, the council, to have a system in place, obviously, to make sure that the powers are exercised appropriately and responsibly, because effectively what you're exercising is some of the powers that the police currently have, basically. So obviously we have to satisfy the police who need to approve our admission into the scheme, that we have the relevant arrangements in place, basically, to make sure that it's properly administered and properly delivered. As the chairman said, and I think Councillor Kirk has said, obviously the training is provided by external providers. What I would say is that certainly within the public protection service, and we do work with colleagues from across the various services within the authority that are involved in enforcement, and I also know this to be the case, that they have very good frameworks in terms of managing enforcement. The framework around enforcement is very tightly controlled for good reasons. So you have all of the stuff around police and criminal evidence and everything else. So basically, so it's very, very tightly controlled, and we do have systems in place already, which basically will ensure that we can manage anybody that's operating within CSAS powers. But it is an important element, and I think the point you make is a really, really important one. This is a really important element that you do have people in there that are able to properly manage that.
Ian, please.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just to reinforce what Sean's said and to reassure Tricia, first of all, the organisation, i.e. Bracknell Forest Council, will be looked into by the Police Crime Prevention Academy, which is a body on behalf of the National Police Chiefs Council. So the organisation needs to pass the test to ensure they've got the management structures, the assessments, and all the things, the checks and balances that Tricia quite rightly alludes to before any officer can be trained. So the organisation is accredited first, then the officers come second.
Thank you for that clarification, Ian. Members, any other questions? John Harrison, please.
Yeah, when it's come to CSAS, I think it's been raised in previous years that maybe we would want to have some of our rangers CSAS accredited as well, because of the potential for disorder in our parks and countryside areas, but specifically parks. And we certainly saw during COVID a lot of unauthorised activity, people lighting barbecues, people having parties, which they shouldn't have been having. And some of that stuff is a bit borderline now. Some of it, such as littering and so on, we want to carry on discouraging, and it would be good if some of our staff were able to do that enforcement activity and issue penalty notices for littering, for example, if they wish to do so, if they wish to take on that responsibility, that the proper training could then be given to them to be able to go and do it without getting into trouble in a bit of argy-bargy. Because I think what Tricia was saying earlier is quite important. You know, we don't want to put our officers in a position where they're exposed and doing things that really should be left to the police. But certainly on some of that low-level stuff on our own property, I think it's very important. And we could make a difference. It's not replacing the police, it's additional to what the police are able to achieve.
Yeah, thank you, John. Tricia, please.
Thanks, Chair. Just wondering about an assessment of costs. Will that be part of what we present, please?
Sean, any idea of costs, please?
Should say
Sorry,
cost
Chair.
benefit, I suppose.
Yes, yeah, I mean, there will be, Councillor Kerr may know the details, but there are costs associated with the original application. And to be fair, we had drafted an application before, and I have now looked at that again, and it just needs a bit of an update. We're probably ready to, once we pull together all the associated document, because I mean, it is very, as we've already said, it's quite strictly controlled, and they do require a lot of documentation to come in. But actually, as a local authority, we have most of that. So what they're expecting to see is things like, going back to the point you were making earlier, is things like your data security policies, data protection, equalities, all of the things that you would expect to see in a law enforcement setting and in a public service delivery setting. But the other cost, basically, which is relatively modest, is the costs around training. And there are quite a few training providers out there who, so it's not basically you're tied to kind of one, and there's not a monopolistic kind of situation. There's quite a few training providers out there, but then the costs, I think, you know, are relatively modest. Councillor Kurt's probably in a better position to talk about some of those costs.
Ian, please.
I think, as I disclosed at the very start of this journey, I'm part of a company that provides that. So I'm not looking to pitch for work or anything like that. But I would use the term modest, as you mentioned there, Sean, but also to reassure members that many providers already provide the opportunity to put forward acquired previous learning. And I think that we can demonstrate as a council that most of our staff, if they're experienced, have got that acquired prior learning. So that would reduce the cost as well. But you're probably looking at the ballpark figure of, 100 to a couple of £100 per officer to be trained fully up without that acquired prior learning. So it is modest in terms of the returns on investment. Going on from that, it depends on which force sort of oversees the process, but between 1 to 3 years, they look at a refresher program, which would be a day's refresher program. So, the on costs going forward are pretty modest as well. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Ian. Any other questions, please? No. Okay. Recommendation 2 is to introduce an allocation process where a team or officer is assigned as the lead for the duration of an enforcement case. Sean, would you like to just give a little bit more detail to that, please?
Yeah, so I mean, we have a system within the public protection service. I mean, we deal with a wide range of cases, and they can be from relatively straightforward, so something like, for example, underage sales or something like that, to very, very complex frauds. But ultimately, the heart of all enforcement matters, there is a framework around that sits around that we need to comply with. So the rules around, retaining evidence and disclosure, and rules around Police and Criminal Evidence Act, and all of that, the sort of stuff that members will have heard about, and the public will have heard about. So what we're proposing here, I think, or what's being proposed here, is that basically that we actually work with other services across the authority, basically to provide that case oversight that we provide within our own service, and that each of these cases, it doesn't matter basically how small it is or how big it is, basically needs that oversight. And what we're suggesting is we can bring the kind of expertise that we've got to the fore to deliver that, Chairman.
Yeah, I think also part of it, Sean, was that, you know, one officer didn't finish their part of the enforcement and then pass it on to another officer, and nobody actually understands what's going on apart from their piece. So that's why
exactly, yeah. So there are things that obviously cut across services as well that obviously we need to make sure are joined up, and that we have basically, so where we have those cross-cutting issues, and it could be something that's done between ourselves and maybe the people involved in civil enforcement, it could be something between ourselves and community safety, or not involve us at all. But the important thing is that there is cross-cutting oversight, and I think basically that's what we're looking at here, basically is the systems around that. And I mean, I have to say that we do a lot of this already, but actually we're talking about basically just having another look at that and see what else we can do.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. Members, any questions, please? Okay, no questions. So we'll move on to recommendation 3, which is develop enforcement strategies, encouraging greater collaboration across services and with partners. And I believe part of that recommendation will be covered by our next review, looking at our strategies and policy into our enforcement. So members, any questions on that, please? No, see no questions. So finally, the recommendation 4 and the final one is to run regular educational and awareness campaigns on enforcement policies and activities for residents. This includes information campaigns on CSAS as it is introduced. Good enforcement should also be publicised and celebrated, particularly where it involves a joint working approach. And the Public Protection Partnership also produce a newsletter which highlights any prosecutions that the PPP have been very successful with. And we've been very successful with a few fly tipping ones recently. So they're all being publicised, and it's just making sure that anything that is enforcement related, that we actually let our residents know, you know, that there is stuff going on. Sometimes these cases do take a long time to come to fruition, and sometimes they're quite quick. You know, it is good to let the public know what is actually going on. Tricia, please.
Thanks, Chair. I was wondering if the enforcement officers do, I expect they do, but enforcement officers, especially the CSAS ones, will be able to talk to the officers of the other partners of the council and suggest changes in procedure so that they avoid having this confrontation of enforcement in the first place, especially in community things. I can't think offhand. I mean, I don't know if it's something that could be done with fly tipping, for instance, so that people are more encouraged to go and put the rubbish in the right place.
I think the number of prosecutions we're actually having for fly tipping is sort of like sending out a very strong message to residents that they do need to dispose of their rubbish correctly. Otherwise, they might end up in court with a nice fine. Sean, do you want to come in on that, please?
Yeah, I just really want to add, so just picking up on the point that's been made about this, and the point that Councillor Brown's just been made. I don't think we can stress too much the importance of communication around enforcement. It serves multiple purposes. First of all, basically, it provides information for residents and for businesses to stop them basically becoming, for example, victims of crime, or actually basically suffering some other form of detriment as a result of issues that may require enforcement down the line. The second thing is, which is really important, is that basically it allows people to come to the authority and say, I understand that you're interested in this. So if you take your example, Chair, of fly tipping, we've done quite a lot of work to not just enforce around fly tipping, and prosecutions are one thing, but actually to raise public awareness and say that actually, if you have information about this, or you see this, or there's something suspicious, can you let us know? because actually the public are really important basically to the whole enforcement picture. The second thing is, of course, just going back to the preventative stuff. And if you take fly tipping again, it's just explaining to the public about, first of all, what their responsibilities are, but secondly, how they can play their part in ensuring that these crimes aren't committed by taking some sort of steps. If you take waste, taking some sort of steps to make sure that it's disposed of appropriately and doesn't end up basically in the hands of somebody that's going to fly tip it. And finally, the issue around enforcement. Obviously, enforcement takes lots of forms, and it could be something it could be a fixed penalty, it could be a caution ultimately, or it could be a prosecution. Some of those make it into the news, but actually. But in terms of the public interest about making this information available, obviously, we want people to know, first of all, that action is being taken in areas of public interest. The second thing is obviously basically the deterrent effect, which is very, very important. But then it also feeds back into this whole loop about public awareness and intelligence gathering. And we've had situations like that in the past where, for example, there's been publicity around a certain case, and then subsequently other people have come forward to us after that, sort of saying, actually, I think I had some involvement with this person, or I had a problem, or I think I may be subject to being some sort of crime as a result of this person's activities. So all of the whole issue of communication, I just really wanted to just talk about how important that is to the enforcement model across the organisation.
Yeah, I think also last night, Sean, we touched upon the communication of letting our residents know of any scams that are doing their rounds and things like that. So, so if we can improve our communication to our residents, that would actually help protect them.
Thank you.
Thank you. Michael Brossard, please.
Good. Thank you for that. Thank you very much, John. Very good points actually raised by both Sean and Tricia. And one of the things I've noticed, and John may have seen as well in social media, with, for instance, We Love Sandhurst, how important it is that residents asking for waste to be collected actually ask that the person collecting with a van or whatever has a trade waste license. And I think this is critical to ensure that they are compliant with the law, because if they aren't, the risk is that not only the trade waste collector, but also the resident will be fined. One of the other things I was going to ask maybe of Sean, is there an increased budget, can I ask Sean, let me adjust the screen, with regard to CCTV? Because I think CCTV in a covert activity can be very useful in terms of identifying those people who actually fly tip in those areas that we've got in Bracknell. So is there a budget available? Has the budget been increased? What is the process for extra CCTV?
Yes, I mean we have got some CCTV cameras, some mobile cameras, Councillor Brossard, that we put in there. Now, obviously, basically how those cameras are deployed very much depends on the council's policy, which was adopted, I think, about a year ago. Basically, the latest CCTV policy, along with the latest surveillance policy. So there are very, very strict controls around that. So, I mean, the vast majority of the time, what we use basically is overt CCTV. We want basically, and with signage and everything else that you would expect to see. There are powers to do things more covertly, but they do require surveillance authorizations potentially, depending on what it is that we're doing. But the vast majority of the time, basically, the CCTV used, in fact, all of the time, more recently, basically, has been overt. In terms of where do they come from? So, well, I mean, we occasionally just replenish the stock of these cameras, but in fact, actually, in the past, we have actually used money from proceeds of crime asset that has been seized as a result of criminal activity, and put some of that money back into the purchase of cameras as well. In previous times, but I think we have adequate camera provision now for the borough, that we are able to move them around, and we are using the latest kind of technology that we can pick up information quite quickly. The important thing to stress is that whenever we use CCTV, it's always deployed in accordance with the council's policy, and there are some very strong safeguards in place to make sure that that is done properly and appropriately.
Thank you for that, Sean. Members, any other questions, please? Okay, I see no other questions, and that concludes our recommendations and our summary. So I'd like to thank all the officers and members for attending tonight. And I look forward to seeing you all very soon. Thank you very much indeed for your participation.
Thanks, John.
Yep,
Thank you, John.
Thank you, John. Yes.